Chapter 13. It was so faint at first, almost like a whisper traveling through the cracks in the house, but it grew stronger. A melody. It was soft and mournful. Piano keys, played with such grace and precision that it pulled me from my thoughts. I froze, my hand suspended above the board, and Darwin looked up. "You hear that?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, listening as the music continued, each note falling like snowflakes. Yet it was somehow comforting. The song seemed to weave through the walls and corridors, echoing in places I couldn't see. It was haunting, like something you'd hear in a dream you never wanted to wake from. Darwin leaned back, tilting his head, as if he could follow the sound to its source. "It's beautiful," he murmured. And it was. The notes had a way of settling deep in your skin, calming everything else. For the first time in days, the tension, the unease, it seemed to slip away, replaced by that gentle melody. The storm outside didn't seem so harsh. The weight of what lay beyond these walls didn't feel so crushing. "Who's playing that?" Darwin asked, his voice soft. I smiled faintly, glancing up toward the ceiling where the music seemed strongest. "Elizabeth," I said. It was strange, how something so beautiful could come from something so strange. And yet, in that moment, it didn't matter. The music wrapped around us like a cocoon, shutting out the storm, the fear, the world beyond. And for a brief moment, it almost felt like everything might be okay. Almost. The warm atmosphere created by the piano music began to falter, though, as Darwin's gaze shifted around the room. His brow furrowed slightly as he looked past the chessboard, the fireplace, and the shadows that flickered along the walls. Then he turned to me. "Where's Lila?" he asked. I paused, glancing behind us to the leather couch where I thought I'd last seen her. The space was empty. "I assumed she was still sitting there," I said, frowning. Darwin stood, brushing his hands on his jeans. "Guess not." We both rose, the sound of the chess pieces scattering slightly on the board as it jolted under the movement. The chill from the storm outside seemed to seep into the room, making the absence of Lila even more noticeable. We stepped into the hallway, the house feeling larger and more silent than it had moments before. The piano music continued, distant and haunting, as if Elizabeth's melody was guiding us. The staircase to the second floor loomed to our right, but Darwin nodded toward the closed door at the end of the hall. "I think she's down there," he said softly, his words drifting down the halls. The hallway's shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally under the dim light. The swirling of the blizzard outside was faintly audible through the thick walls, a reminder of the chaos beyond. Just outside the living room was a large open room with a tall ceiling. There, standing by the frosty window, was Lila. Her back was to us, her shoulders tense, and her phone was pressed to her ear. Even from a distance I could tell she was trying and failing to reach someone. Her frantic pacing and the sharp gestures of her free hand betrayed her rising panic. "Lila?" Dolan called softly. She flinched, snapping her head toward us. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with worry. She lowered the phone for a moment. "What are you doing?" I asked, stepping closer. "I'm trying to call my parents," she said, her voice trembling. "They're not answering. I've been trying for the last hour and a half." Darwin rubbed the back of his neck. "It's probably the storm. The blizzard's gotta be messing with the cell towers." Lila shook her head, gripping the phone tightly. "No, it's not that. My signal's working fine. There's no reason for them to not answer, especially in this weather." "Are you sure they're not asleep or something?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. She shook me a look. Yes, I'm sure. Even if they were, they would always answer. Even if they're working, they'd call me back in minutes. Her voice cracked, and she clenched her jaw to steady it. Something's wrong. I can feel it. Darwin held up a hand. Look, Lila, it's a storm. Maybe their power's out. It's perfectly normal if we just wait. We need to wait out this blizzard. No, she cut him off, her voice rising. You don't care. I don't expect you to, but I'm going out there to check on them. They live in a small farmhouse not far from here. She spun on her heel, marching toward the coat rack by the front door. Of course we care, Lila. Just wait for a moment, I said, stepping after her. Darwin caught her arm gently as she reached for her heavy coat. Lila, you're not thinking clearly. You know we can't go out there. We have to wait out the storm, when the sun comes out. She pulled free, her movements frantic. I don't care. They could be in trouble. I have to check if they're all right. The music suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, the echoes of the piano lingering faintly before fading into nothingness. Darwin and I turned instinctively toward the staircase. Halfway down, Elizabeth stood, her lifeless face illuminated by the dim glow of the hallway. She took one slow, deliberate step down, her hand brushing the banister. What do you think you're doing? She asked, her voice quiet but cold. Lila turned, defiant. I'm going to check on my parents. They aren't answering and something's wrong. Elizabeth's gaze flickered toward me and Darwin, then back to Lila. Her cold, white lips pressed into a thin line as she descended another step. You foolish girl, she said. Her voice was sharp as the very wind outside. After all you have seen, and you still do not understand what's out there. I understand enough to know I can't sit here while my parents... You understand nothing, Elizabeth interrupted, her voice rising slightly. You think this is just a storm? A passing inconvenience? You have no idea what's waiting for you beyond that door. Theron then emerged from the shadows near the stairs, his tall frame imposing. She is right. You'd be walking into your own grave. Lila turned toward him, her expression torn between anger and fear. Then come with me. Help me. If you're so powerful, then... No, Theron said firmly. We exist because we don't tempt fate, and neither should you. If Bael has found your parents, they are as good as dead. Elizabeth reached the bottom of the stairs, her presence filling the room like a shadow. If you leave this house, you will die a ruthless death. It is as simple as that. Before anyone could say more, a softer voice broke the tension. I'll go with them. All heads turned toward the top of the staircase. Cedric stood there, his hands tucked into the pockets of his trousers, his expression calm but resolute. Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. Cedric? Do not worry, Elizabeth. The farmhouse is 5 miles from here. It will not take long. We began bundling ourselves in heavy coats, gloves, and scarves. The 4 of us stood by the front door, our breath already clouding the cold air leaking through the gaps. Lila's face was tight with determination as she zipped her coat to her chin, her fingers trembling slightly. Darwin gave me a look, half nervous and half resigned, and nudged. We ready? "Ready," I replied, though I didn't feel it. Cedric stood slightly apart, the only one of us who hadn't reached for winter gear. His attire was absurdly out of place. Polished shoes, black trousers, an old white shirt that seemed more suited to a brisk autumn stroll than a howling blizzard. He adjusted the sleeves of his shirt, his face dull and empty of any emotion. When Lila nodded, I reached for the door and pulled it open. The wind hit us like with a raging fury, clawing its way inside the second the door cracked. A deafening roar filled the hallway, and icy needles of snow swirled in, stinging my exposed face. The blizzard was relentless and furious. Beyond the door was a wall of white, the snow so thick and swirling so fast it was impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The tall pines that surrounded the property groaned under the weight of the snow and swayed violently in the storm. Their silhouettes flickered in and out of view through the blowing mist, their branches whipping like skeletal arms. The sound of creaking wood and snapping twigs joined the unending howl of the wind, creating a discordant symphony that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. We stepped outside, the cold swallowing us whole. The air was so frigid it felt like knives cutting into my lungs. The snow crunched and shifted beneath my boots, and I could already feel it soaking into the fabric around my ankles. I pulled my hood tighter, using my scarf to shield the lower half of my face, my eyes narrowing against the violence. Darwin shuffled beside me, one arm braced against the wind as he muttered curses under his breath. "I've never seen anything like this." I couldn't disagree. Lila was ahead of us, her head bowed, her hand clutching her scarf as it flipped wildly in the wind. Then there was Cedric. He strode forward with unbothered at ease, his hands at his sides, his neck held high. Snow whipped around him, but none of it seemed to stick, his hair barely blowing or touched by the frost. But the most unusual thing was the fact that his feet weren't even sinking into the snow. It was as if he weighed nothing, the blizzard bending to his presence. I tightened my coat and watched him, uneasy, the way he walked so undisturbed while the rest of us struggled to keep our footing. It was a reminder, one I didn't need, that Cedric was a being far beyond anything we could comprehend. We finally reached Lila's car, half buried in a layer of powdery snow. She yanked the driver's door open and slid inside, slamming the dashboard to knock loose a sheet of frost that had settled on it. Cedric climbed into the passenger seats with the same unhurried grace, brushing non-existent snowflakes off his shoulder. Darwin and I clambered into the back, slamming the door shut against the storm. The air inside was slightly warmer, but it smelled of damp fabric and cold metal. My fingers ached as I rubbed them together, trying to rub some warmth back into them. Lila started the engine, the car groaning to life. "Seat belts," she muttered, her voice tight. The windshield wipers struggled to clear the glass, smearing a thin layer of frost over the edges as we pulled away from the house. Outside, the storm howled with renewed anger, the headlights barely piercing through the swirling snow. The drive was slow and tense, the road ahead barely visible. The frost loomed on either side, its dark shapes twisting and shifting in the storm. "He's out there, somewhere," I thought to myself. As I watched each towering pine pass us, the snow muffled all sound except the wind and the steady hum of the engine. It was eerily quiet in the car, no one daring to break the silence. I leaned my head against the cold window, watching as the trees flickered past. The reality of what we were doing, of where we were going, weighed heavily in my chest. We were leaving the relative safety of the Dralok House, stepping deeper into the void. I could feel it in the air, the suffocating presence of something wrong. We finally reached the farm. The blizzard had carved a barren white wasteland out of what had once been roaring fields. The surrounding forest opened to a wide clearing, and the snow was piled high against the fence posts that lined the property. There was the silhouette of a small two-story house at the far end of the field, its windows dark and lifeless, half buried under the weight of the storm. The sheer darkness of the house was what caught me first, not just the absence of light, but the way it felt, silent, hollow, like the building itself had been claimed by the unnatural frost. No warm glow spilled from the windows, just shadows. Lila was already ahead of us, her pace quickening. "Why aren't the lights on?" she muttered, more to herself than to us. I saw her hesitate for half a second, then break into a run. Her boots crunched against the snow, each step swallowed by the howling wind. "Lila, wait!" I called after her, but she didn't slow. Darwin and I exchanged a glance before hurrying to catch up. Cedric, undeterred, followed effortlessly at his own pace. His face looked more alert. By the time he reached the front porch, Lila was frantically knocking on the door, her fist thudding against the heavy wood. "Mom? Dad?" Her voice cracked, carrying over the storm. "It's me. Please open the door." No response. She pounded harder, her breaths coming fast and shallow. "They're not answering," she said, her voice rising in panic. Darwin stepped up beside her. "Maybe they're in the back, or they would have come to the door. They're always home at this time," she snapped, cutting him off. Then her tone softened, desperate now. "They wouldn't just leave. They would have told me where they were going." I stepped closer, trying to think of something reassuring to say, but my eyes caught her hand trembling as she reached for the flower pot by the door. She tipped it over, her fingers fumbling with the hidden key underneath. "Lila," I said carefully, "if they haven't come to the door, then they are not home. Let's go back while we still have time." "They wouldn't leave without telling me," she said, her voice sharp as she unlocked the door. The storm howled behind us as the door swung open. The inside of the house greeted us with a surprising warmth, as though a fire had been lit somewhere deep within. But it was dark, no lights, save for the faint glow of fading sun struggling to pierce the snowstorm filtering through the windows. Lila stepped in first, flipping the light switch by the door. Nothing happened. She flipped it again. Still nothing. "Power's out," Darwin said, glancing around. "No, it's not," she said firmly, her tone almost defiant. "Feel the heat. The generator's working." She marched further into the house, pulling her phone out to use its flashlight. We followed, the warm air feeling suffocating after the bitter cold outside. My boots started softly against the hardwood floor as we stepped inside, the sound unnervingly loud in the quiet. "Mom? Dad?" Lila's voice echoed through the empty house as she moved from room to room. "It's me. Are you home?" No answer. I could see her hands shaking as she pushed open doors, her flashlight cutting through the shadows. A faint smell of pine and something faintly sweet lingered in the air, but it did nothing to ease the tension coiling in my chest. "They're not here," Darwin said after a few moments, his voice uneasy. "Maybe they went to town to check on the others." Lila turned to him, her eyes sharp and wet with unshed tears. Not in this weather, not without telling me. It's not like them." "Lila," I said softly, stepping forward, "there's probably a reasonable explanation. Maybe the phone lines are down, and they went back to check on neighbors or something. It doesn't mean, Ethan, they would have told me. You guys don't get it. If they leave the house in an important situation, they always call me first." Her phone light wavered as her hand trembled. They would have left a note, sent me a message. They wouldn't just leave like that." The weight of her words settled heavily over all of us. Cedric spoke then, his voice quiet but firm. "They didn't leave." Lila turned to him sharply. "What?" He tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something none of us could hear. "Their scent," he said. "It is still fresh. I could smell it the second we got out of the car. It lingers in this air." I shivered, not from the warmth, but from the way his words cut through the tension like a blade. Darwin glanced toward the nearest window, where the glass was straight from the snow. "So, what then? If they didn't leave, where the hell are they?" We all stood there in the silence that followed, the only sound the faint howling of the storm outside. Then, I noticed the barn. Through the front window, its dark silhouette loomed in the distance, barely visible through the swirling snow. Its peaked roof and wide doors stood out like a shadow against the endless white. "There," I said, pointing. Lila frowned. "The barn? Why would they be in the barn?" "It's worth a look," I said. "If they're still in the area, where else could they be?" Darwin nodded reluctantly. "He's right. Couldn't hurt to check." Lila hesitated, her lips trembling. We haven't used that barn in years. This doesn't make any sense." I didn't have an answer for her. None of us did. Cedric was already moving toward the front door, his footsteps unhurried. We followed him outside, the wind ripping at us the moment we stepped into the porch. The snow was heavier now, the world reduced to a swirling blur of white. I pulled my scarf tighter around my face, squinting against the freezing mist as we trudged toward the barn. Each step felt heavier than the last, my boots sinking into the snow. The sound of the wind in our labored breaths filled the air, and the barn grew larger, its dark frame taking shape through the snow. The closer we got, the more oppressive the air felt, like the storm itself was pushing back against us. My chest tightened as we reached the towering doors. We stopped in front of the barn, its wide doors looming above us. I could hear the faint creak of the wood shifting in the wind. Darwin glanced at me, his flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. "Well, are we going in, or—"
"Wait,"
Cedric said, his voice sharp and low. I froze. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. That voice, deeper, darker, with a jagged guttural edge that felt like it came from something not entirely human. My heart jumped in my chest. "What?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the storm. Cedric stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "There," he said, gesturing downward. I followed his gaze. Just in front of the door, nearly lost in the swirling snow, were a few small drops of something dark, smeared and almost hidden in the white. Blood. "Oh shit," Darwin muttered, his voice wavering. It was fresh, too fresh. The red hadn't turned completely dark yet, and the snow beneath it was barely crusted over. My stomach twisted. Lila was already trembling beside me, her face pale, her eyes wide with something close to panic. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. Tears welled up in her eyes and her voice cracked. "No, no, no." "Lila," I started, reaching out for her, but she slapped my hand away. "Move," she snapped, shoving me aside and Darwin as she stormed to the barn doors. "Wait," I said, grabbing her arm, but she wrenched it free. She didn't listen. She grabbed the handle of the door and flung it open.